Michael, why don't you start by telling me what are the key changes that you've noticed in the broadband industry?
What we see happening in the broadband industry is a significant shift with regards to mindset, right? If you look at the industry over the last couple decades, it's been very operationally focused and what's my network, and that's really differentiated between who's a telco and who's a cable company, right? And as we go into this next stage with the industry, we see it all coming together because everybody's starting to realize that fiber is the way forward, and that what defined what made a cable company and what made a telco what they are is actually no longer relevant because the network technology is really coming together to the same thing. And so that's the first thing, and what that then drives is everybody's starting to think differently. Because if we're using the similar infrastructure which doesn't differentiate, and we're all driving these incredible speeds that consumers may or may not need, then how do I differentiate in the marketplace? And this is really at the kind of the crux of how Calix thinks and what we're doing, which is we believe that new mindset is really important, where broadband service providers become more than network operators. They actually become the managed service providers for their consumers and their small businesses. So that, we think, is this big disruption that's happening right now.
So about what you said about what makes a company is no longer relevant, can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Again, it was technology that made, so if you think a cable company was a cable company because they used DOCSIS. Telecommunications company was because they really focused on telephony and IP and all those different things, and we're using copper-based technologies. And now with that radical shift away from those older technologies to everybody on fiber, it means that there is no such thing as a telco and a cable company. And I think that has very profound implications to our industry as a whole.
Great. And what metric do you think that broadband providers should be focused on the most?
Well, in the past, the metric was, I think, a bit of a legacy metric. Everybody was focused on homes passed. How many homes passed can I get? But as we go into this next stage now that a lot of companies have done some significant builds, it's not going to be about homes passed. It's actually going to be about how many consumers and small businesses have I connected. And so that key metric is going to be how many have I connected, which is really my fill capacity on what my potential is. And then on top of that, what is my incremental revenue? And it's no longer, again, just about I'm providing a speed-based service and therefore I only have one service to provide. It's all about how do I provide these incremental services and grow my business from an ARPU point of view day to day. So I'd say those are the two things: subscribers connected and ARPU.
Great. And what's an example of a company that you've seen that's embracing these disruptions successful?
Well, I'm here at ACA Connect, which is the Cable Association, and in there you have a whole bunch of companies who are exactly what I've talked about. They used to be telcos and cable companies, and the best example I can give is Schurz. Schurz has multiple properties and systems. Some of them come from a telco heritage, some of them come from a cable heritage, but the entire organization is now becoming a broadband company. And so as they embrace that, they're putting in this long life asset. So in their case, they're deploying a lot of 10 gig fiber. And the reason why they're doing it is not necessarily for a competitive benefit with regards to speed, because speed doesn't sell. They're putting it in place because once they install it, the reality is they're not going to have to touch it for 20 years. And so they get that in place, and then they can pivot their entire organization to focus on what's most important, which is how do I delight my subscribers, how do I understand what their needs are, and how do I drive all these incremental services so that they're loyal to me, and then I generate incremental ARPU. That's a great example of a company moving from that telco cable mindset to a broadband mindset.
And on the subject of 10 gig services, what do you think of the future of those types of services and offerings?
So when it comes to 10 gig, I think it's a bit nonsensical. 10 gig is just about split ratios and what capacity and how many splits you can put on a network. The simple reality is most customers don't need that capacity and won't for a long time. We actually did, and I'm very public about this, we looked across 100 fiber providers who have, each of them have tens of thousands of subscribers. So we're talking a very broad set of customers, and every single one had to offer multiple tiers: 100, 200, 500, 750, a gig, 2 gig, all these different things. And what we found is that this whole concept, which It's all the box vendors that are pushing 10 gig. And now they're pushing 50 gig. Oh, and that's because that's the only thing they have to talk about. Speed, speed, speed. Buy my latest optic, buy 10 gig, buy 50 gig. They have nothing else to talk about. And what our customers are realizing is, that's an interesting CapEx decision, so I don't have to touch it for 20 years. But when I look across those 100 fiber providers, only 17% of consumers chose to actually take a 1 gig or larger service. 17%. Now, there are some other customers who would say, oh wait, I'm not 17%, I'm actually like 40%. Doesn't matter, it's not 100%. So if speed actually meant something to the end consumer, it would be 100% of customers taking whatever you offer, 1 gig, 2 gig, 5 gig, 10 gig. It just doesn't mean anything to the end consumer. 23% of consumers across those 100 fiber providers actually only took a 100 gig service. So, as we look forward, this whole concept of 10 gig is just a CapEx decision for the long term, but not relevant. It's not a go-to-market strategy. And so that's what we're spending a lot of time with our customers is, you got to get away from the love of technology into what do my consumers need and how do I build these amazing experiences for them. So to your question on what are the right services, what's the right 10 gig service? It's not about that. It's actually about what are the managed services that I want to get from you as my trusted service provider. And some great examples are, when I was 25, I was a DIY guy. Or DIY guy. Do it yourself, whatever the acronym is. I get it backwards all the time. But I would go and play with that technology and install all that kind of stuff. Now, I want no part of it. If my service provider would say to me, hey, here's the web cameras, here's the home security, I'm gonna run your virus protection, here's all the incremental services that I can provide you to make your life better in a managed way so you don't have to spend time on the internet trying to figure it out why it doesn't work, I would buy it from them. And we really do believe this is the pivot. Broadband service providers have a trusted brand. They have this huge opportunity to provide new services, and whether it's on 1 gig or 10 gig, it doesn't really matter. It's just give it to me in a managed way that's no headaches, and I'll keep paying you.
So basically a service that is easy to manage and to understand.
Exactly, right? I don't want to spend all my time, and let's talk about small business, which has been a chronically underserved market because everyone tries to take these really complex enterprise solutions and put them down into the small business, and it never works. I'm a baker, right? I bake, and I have a couple people who work for me. We bake lots of bread in the morning, and then what am I going to go on the internet and try to learn how to be an admin of my security system and my network and all these things? I don't want to do any of that. I want my service provider to give me all those services, cybersecurity, firewall, all those capabilities right out of the box so I can do what I'm good at, baking, right? And I think that's how most people think about their home lives too. If I'm working from home, I want my service provider to offer me a service where it knows when I'm on Zoom or whatever video package you're using, and it actually understands my broadband needs and pops the broadband up. This is now becoming a possibility because we did something that hasn't been done before, which is end-to-end autonomous provisioning, which is a big step towards bandwidth on demand, which means that I can understand what your needs are, and in the moment, hey, day-to-day, you're doing 100 meg requirement, but then all of a sudden you're doing a whole bunch of Zoom calls or maybe 4K video or whatever it is, boom, we pop you up to a gig and we give you that great service as a differentiator. This is where the industry has to go.
So by autonomous provisioning, you mean ensuring that you have the speed that you need for a given situation. And
service. And autonomous, I mean, look, we all are facing a crisis in the industry because we don't have the teams. We have a lot of elderly teams, bluntly. We have a lot of people over 50 who are thinking of retiring, and the last time I checked, the computer science students weren't clamoring to go into, become network administrators. It's just, they're going to, Facebook and Google and all these other cloud companies, right? And so we have a real tough time attracting people to our industry, so we better figure out how to use all these great AI engines to actually make it so everything can be autonomous. And once we put the policy in, which is, hey, I've got this service, it needs this capacity, that policy's in place and the engine understands it, then it will provision it right across the network and across the router to make sure that you've got everything that you need to be happy. And if your needs change, you should be able to understand that and then again, adjust accordingly. That's where we have to go as an industry because we just don't have the people to do it manually.
Right. And on the subject of cybersecurity, why do you think broadband providers can be a good line of defense for that?
Oh, that's a great question. Look, cybersecurity is fascinating. There isn't any one solution for cybersecurity, right? So, and I give the best example I can give is I've got family members who are gamers, right? And they just got these new monster machines, and what I did was I went and said, well, so why don't you have virus protection on it? And they said, well, if I put virus protection on it, it'll slow it down, right? But as long as I have network protection as a start, at least I'm getting some cybersecurity in there. And so cybersecurity is about layers of defense. And so for all of those people who are not very sophisticated with regards to it, a service provider can put in multiple layers of cybersecurity to at least help people who don't know how to do it to have a base level of security. And so I think that's something that we're all going to be doing, where many of the broadband providers are already doing it as kind of a core part of what their offerings are, and they're able to do it because my mother and father can't do that, right? My mother-in-law and father-in-law can't. And so I think they're in this unique position to meet that need.
Great. And just to kind of wrap things up, what do you think providers should be narrowing their focus on in like the next year or two?
The narrowing of focus is, again, back to this transformation where speed is not a go-to-market strategy. So everybody needs to recognize that if speed is their go-to-market strategy, chances are they're going to be commoditized. There's some won't be. So for example, if I'm all by myself in a market and I'm a monopoly, hey, fair enough. Make your only go-to-market strategy speed because you have no competition. But for the vast majority of broadband providers, they're going to have 2, 3, in some places I've heard 5, 6, 7 competitors in a market. And if that's the case, all you have to do is look to the mobile market, to the Armageddon that is pricing over there, and that if you just stick to speed, and that's the only go-to-market that you have, then you can expect your prices are going to go down, your margins are going to be compressed, and you're going to be in a commodity market. So in that scenario, what do you need to do? That means you need to build out a strategy, which is what we've invested over $1 billion into with our platforms. You need to have a strategy around how do you become the managed service provider to make the lives better for your consumers and small businesses. And that's what we're all about. That smart business, smart town, how do we engage there to kind of change the community and our consumers?
Well said. Thank you so much, Michael, for your time.
Thanks for your time, Masha. Really appreciate it.